for all sorts of reasons, Nice has healing powers. And whether it is just that area and all the people that used to stay there, or it's the salty air, or it's all the amazingly healthy fruit and vegetables and the local food, the actual Nice cooking.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Stories Cafe podcast, the espresso version of Stories Cafe, a brief, enriching pause for reflection on literature, cinema, archetypes, philosophy, and the art of living deliberately. I'm Annette Wernblatt, course creator, internationally published author, and wanderer at heart. So cozy up and let's once again step into the world of stories and the deep ways in which they can shape the lives we live.
Well, let's just start with a quote to set the table, celebrating the south of France, celebrating the Riviera, celebrating in particular Nice, but that entire area. Here's a quote that I think explains so well what is it about that part of the world that is so amazing. When your eyes first fall upon the Mediterranean, you know at once why it was here that man first stood erect and stretched out his arms toward the sun. It is a blue sea, or rather, it is too blue for that hackneyed phrase which has described every muddy pool from pole to pole. It is the fairy blue of Maxfield Parrish's pictures, blue like blue books, blue oil, blue eyes, and in the here comes the main part. And in the shadow of the mountains, a green belt of land runs along the coast for 100 miles and makes a playground for the world. And in the shadow of the mountains, because right behind you have the mountains of Provence, right behind Nice, right behind that entire stretch. And I think it's the most beautiful description. In the shadow of the mountains, a green belt of land runs along the coast for 100 miles, the entire Riviera, and makes a playground for the world. And the quote, of course, is from one of the other great lovers of the south of France, namely F. Scott Fitzgerald. He wrote this for a paper as an article in 1924, and the piece was called How to Live on Practically Nothing. Because one of the things, the other day I had a group of my students here, and one of them asked me, is it expensive to stay in Nice? And I'm like, well, it depends. I mean, you could eat at 4-star Michelin restaurants, but you can also just go to the baker and buy the most amazing bread you have ever tasted and just butter and a piece of ham. Remember one time I was in Cannes. It was not during the film festival. I was just there. And I bought a sandwich just from a little cart down on the Croisette. And it was just a piece of baguette with butter and ham. And I was like, I've never tasted anything that tasted this good. So I think it's such an apt title, How to Live on Practically Nothing. You can spend obviously a lot of money anywhere in France. You can go to fancy shops and restaurants and whatever, but you don't have to. This is what I do. I mean, I live on practically nothing when I'm there. So basically the 100 miles that Fitzgerald talks about is from the Spanish border on the west to the Italian border on the east. That whole stretch is the Riviera, and that's the playground for the world that Fitzgerald talks about. And this entire stretch is so filled with the most beautiful museums. They're not just boring museums, even though the art is interesting. Museums can sometimes be a little bit boring. The museums in this area are absolutely exquisite. One of my favorites is the Picasso Museum in Antibes, which is just a villa overlooking the ocean, and you have all the sculptures outside, and you have everywhere you go, you can look at these exquisite Picassos with the view of that ocean right outside the window. So I had a period where I was coming out of a very painful relationship, and it was a very painful period, and for all sorts of reasons, Nice has healing powers. And whether it is just that area and all the people that used to stay there, or it's the salty air, or it's all the amazingly healthy fruit and vegetables and the local food, the actual niece cooking. And if we have any time left over, I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I probably have more material today I can see than we in any way have time for. So I'll just go through some of the stories and give you a sense of what is it that's so special about this area, and then I can save some of the other stories for some other time. But during that period where I went there to sort of patch myself together, I was sitting there by the window and on the first evening, and I was really not feeling good. So I was sitting there with a glass of local wine, looking at the mountains of Provence in the background. And one of the magical things that happen when you look in that direction rather than the ocean, all I have to do actually from my little flat is go out onto the stairwell, and then I can overlook the ocean from the windows in the stairwell. But my flat has a view of the mountains. So sitting there with a glass of wine, looking at, it was getting darker. The lights start coming on in the mountains of Provence. People live there, so you can't see the houses, but you can then see these little, almost like a string of pearls, that the little lights would come on more and more and more in that whole area. And I was just thinking, well, there are things to focus on that are so beautiful and so life-giving, that if I focus on that and just let my pain be, then hopefully eventually it will dissipate and let go. But then I started writing these things down, that I started writing a collection of, it's not exactly short stories, because it was a sort of combination of therapy just to go through my emotions and also turning it partly into fiction. So I started writing a chapter every day. And I would just, during that time where I had my apéro, as they call it in France, which is the apéritif, when the workday is finished, you have a single drink, a glass of wine or something else. So whether it was in my room or whether it was downstairs in a cafe or a restaurant, I would take out my phone, which was a tiny little iPhone at that time, and I would write a chapter on that phone. And I would send it to my coach in Edinburgh every night. And so I still have that collection of prose. It's all still in draft form. I've never done anything else with it ever since. But preparing for this day, I thought, well, maybe I should actually take that up again and look at all those chapters and tweaking them a little bit. Because now at this point, years later, they're obviously more fiction than fact. So I would like you to actually read you a few passages from that work, which sort of tentatively is called The Pilgrim. Chapter 6 is about painting. And here's the opening of that chapter. It's little wonder that the light here has inspired so many of the great painters. The sunset over the Mediterranean every night looks like a perfect watercolor painted by a soft, loving master's hand in an endless variety of pastels that constantly transform and shift with every second that passes. When darkness falls, color ceases to exist, and so exquisite baby blue and gold and rose gradually melt into periwinkle, then purple, then the deepest dark ink blue. Now, as I sit here, I have right in front of me the ocean singing its forceful ancient lullaby, all black except for the moon that it reflects.
Thank you so much for joining me. If this episode added value to your day, you're always welcome to return. You can follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so that each new episode lands directly in your podcast app. And if you feel like leaving a review, it helps others to find their way here too. If you'd like to go deeper, you're warmly welcome inside Stories Cafe. Just go to stories-cafe.com, where you'll find further reflections, conversations, and a growing library of ideas. I'm looking forward to welcoming you back next time.